In the tangled bayous and pine-shadowed backroads of northern Louisiana, time moves differently. The land itself seems older than the century, older than the rusting bridges and collapsing barns, older than the bones buried beneath churchyards no one tends anymore. The air hangs heavy, damp with whispers, and if you've ever stood alone in those woods after sundown, you'll understand why so many stories are carried through the generations there. Stories of things that should have been left buried. Stories of tragedies that refuse to end with death. And among those, one stands out. The story of the Earll family murders in the year 1902. It's a story most people have never heard, though it once rippled like a curse through rural Louisiana. Even today, locals will drop their voices when it comes up, as though afraid the very mention of the name might invite something back into the room. This is no ordinary crime, no simple tale of a family lost. The murders of the Earll family left scars in the soil itself. They left questions that no lawman, no priest, and no neighbor could answer. And they left behind a darkness that locals swear still lingers in the house. Or rather, what remains of it, out on that stretch of forgotten land. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you the story. But be warned, this is not a story you'll walk away from comfortably. Some tragedies don't fade with the years. Some tragedies cling. In 1902, the town of Caddo Parish was little more than a scattering of farms, sawmills, and dusty roads. The Earll family lived on the edge of that community, on a piece of farmland that backed up to dense pine forest. The patriarch, Thomas Earll, was a stern but respected farmer. His wife, Margaret, was known for her quiet kindness, always leaving jars of preserves on neighbors' porches, or sewing for families who couldn't afford their own. They had 3 children: Samuel, age 12, curious and headstrong; Clara, age 9, sweet-faced but nervous, always clinging to her mother's skirt; and the baby, Evelyn, only 3 years old. The Earlls were not wealthy, but their farm kept them fed. They raised chickens, hogs, and a small plot of corn. Neighbors described them as decent, God-fearing folk. Yet even in life there were whispers, strange lights spotted near their barn at night. The sound of weeping drifting from the trees when Margaret swore she was alone. And there were the children's mutterings, Clara especially, who once told a neighbor lady that she saw the tall man standing by her window at night. A figure she claimed wore no hat, but whose head was too long, too narrow, as though stretched. At the time, such talk was brushed off as childish imagination. But looking back now, people wonder if the Earll family was already marked. The week before the murders, odd events began to pile up. The Earl's animals grew restless, clucking and squealing at shadows. Samuel complained of nightmares so vivid he refused to sleep in his room, begging to stay on the floor by the fire instead. Margaret confided to her sister that she felt a heaviness in the house, as though unseen eyes followed her from room to room. On September nights, neighbors claimed they saw lantern light flickering through the Earl's fields long past midnight. But Thomas swore he never left the house. The strangest moment came just 2 nights before the murders. A traveling preacher moving through the countryside stopped at the Earls' home to ask for water. He later told townsfolk that the family seemed unusually tense. Margaret's hand shook as she poured water. Clara, pale as chalk, whispered to him. Clara, pale as chalk, whispered to him.
They come to the door at night.
When he asked who, the little girl just shook her head. The preacher, disturbed, offered to say a blessing over the home. Thomas declined. The night was September 15th, 1902. The air was heavy, thunder threatening from far away, though no storm ever came. Sometime in the early morning hours, neighbors reported hearing a piercing scream. Some dismissed it as an animal. Others said it was too human to ignore. By daylight, no one had gone to check. Out here, people kept to themselves. It wasn't until late afternoon, when a farmhand noticed the Earl's livestock wandering loose, that suspicion grew. The front door of the house stood open, swinging on its hinges. The windows were dark. What they found inside would never leave them. Every member of the Earll family was dead. Thomas was found slumped in the doorway, throat slashed, his blood soaked into the wood. Margaret was discovered in the kitchen, collapsed near the stove as though she'd tried to run. Her face was described as Her face was described as frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouth open. The children, Samuel and Clara, were found together in their bedroom, their small bodies twisted as though they had tried to shield one another. No one spoke of Evelyn at first, but later it was said she was found in her crib, untouched but lifeless all the same. Not a single mark on her. Here's the part that chills even hardened historians. The body showed signs of violence. Yes, but not all of it could be explained. Neighbors whispered that Thomas's body was rigid, bent backward unnaturally. Margaret's hair had turned noticeably white overnight, and Clara's tiny handprints were seared into the wall beside her bed, blackened as though burned there. The coroner's report, what little exists today, was inconclusive. He marked the cause of death as homicide by persons unknown. But many believe the Earll family died from something more than blades or hands, something darker. Authorities investigated, but quickly ran into dead ends. No valuables were missing. The doors and windows were locked from the inside, save for the front door. There were no wagon tracks, no footprints in the mud outside. Suspicion fell on drifters, bandits, even neighbors with grudges. Yet no one was ever arrested. The case went cold within weeks, but the people of Caddo Parish whispered other explanations. Some claimed the family had been cursed. Others said Thomas had angered someone, perhaps an old worker, perhaps a man skilled in folk magic. Louisiana at the turn of the century was thick with tales of hoodoo, curses, and swamp witches. Whether you believe in such things or not, the people there certainly did. And then there were those who believed the Earls had been taken by something not human at all. After the murders, the Earll farmhouse stood empty. But people avoided the property long before it rotted. Travelers reported lanterns glowing in the windows at night, even though the house was abandoned. Some swore they heard children crying from the woods, distant child's cry. Others claimed to see a pale woman standing on the porch at dusk, her hair loose, her face hidden in shadow. The bravest, usually young men dared by friends, snuck into the house. They rarely lasted long. One boy ran screaming after swearing he saw small handprints appear fresh in the dust on the wall. Another claimed he heard a baby crying upstairs, though the Earl's infant daughter had been dead for years. Distant baby crying. By 1910, the house had nearly collapsed. But even as the roof sagged and the walls caved in, no one dared tear it down. With no answers, legends grew like weeds. Some said the Earll family had been victims of a night doctor, a secretive figure from Southern folklore who performed dark experiments on human bodies. Others claimed it was the work of the Rougarou, Louisiana's own werewolf. Still others believed the Earls had seen something in those woods, something that marked them for death. A strange detail emerged years later, when a local man claimed his grandfather once helped Thomas Earll clear land. They discovered, he said, an old burial ground, native by the looks of it. Hidden beneath tangled brush, Thomas had plowed it under. Days later, their livestock began dying one by one. Whether that's truth or embellishment, no one can say. But it's the kind of story people in Louisiana never forget. What makes the Earll family murders so unsettling isn't just the brutality. It's the silence that followed. No justice, no suspects. Just the sense that something moved through that house, claimed those lives, and then vanished. Even today, if you drive those back roads, you'll hear the warnings. Don't stop by the old Earll property after sundown. Don't listen if you hear a child calling from the trees. Don't look in the windows if you see a light inside, because some say the Earls never left. They say Margaret's figure still moves through the ruins, clutching her youngest to her chest. They say Thomas still guards the doorway, his shadow long and bent. And they say Clara still presses her hands to the wall, trying to leave a message for anyone willing to see. A message burned into wood and into time. The Earll family murders remain unsolved more than a century later. No one living knows the full truth of what happened on that September night in 1902. Maybe it was violence by human hands, a crime lost to history. Maybe it was something stranger, something that defies explanation. But one thing is certain, in the lonely fields of Louisiana, where the air hums with cicadas and the trees hold their secrets, the Earll name has never been forgotten. It lingers in the land, in the whispers, in the silence that falls whenever their story is told. And if you ever find yourself on a dirt road near where their farmhouse once stood, and you see a lantern flicker in the distance, do not follow it, because some doors once opened never close. Like and subscribe for more sinister stories like this.